All right, so this is strategy 3, which is rigorous student products. So what we really wanna do, especially because we have a smaller group this morning, is we really want to, again, tailor this towards you, make sure that you are getting everything that you need out of it. And so we're gonna really ask for your responses and engagement when it comes to, like, what you need out of this session. So, our game plan is we're first going to go over, like, what rigorous instruction is. It's a term that's thrown out a lot, in every different school building, and the definition can look very different depending on the building you're at, so we wanna really, like, norm around what we are talking about when it comes to rigor. And then we'll go into some different ideas of how to really, like, beef up the rigor in your lessons through using choice boards and rubrics. Anything you wanna add, Amy, before we get started? Awesome. So this specific strategy is really focused on, of course, our CRE mindset of high expectations, but we're really going to hunker down into DPS practice 1, which is that engaging students in rigorous and engaging differentiated tasks. And then even more focused, we're going to get into key action 3. So we really want to make sure that our tasks have a high cognitive demand and allow students a variety of ways to offer solutions to those. So those are going to be like real world, like problem solving skills that they need to be uh, proficient in 21st century job skills.
Okay, so we're going to start by defining rigor and what it is. So I'll give you a second to read this definition of rigor. Okay, so as you can see, we're going to be talking a lot about what rigor looks like, how to incorporate it into your lessons today, how to really give the cognitive load to the students and really engage them in some critical thinking and strategic thinking. So that is our goal for this strategy session today. And then we're going to go through what rigor looks like. So commonly, rigor is thought to just be giving students more work, or a lot of times the teacher does a lot of work thinking they need to make their lesson more rigorous, so they spend a lot more hours planning and thinking it through, but then really the teacher's the one doing all of the cognitive work, and then the student a lot of the times still has a pretty simple task. So that is not what rigor looks like. Giving above grade level work is also not rigor, which I think tends to happen in a lot of classrooms with some of the learners who are performing at a higher level, and it's just easy to give them higher grade level work without maybe just giving them more thought out tasks that are going to engage them in some critical thinking. Or too much or not enough scaffolding. So that goes both ways. Too much scaffolding could make something less rigorous, but not enough could also do the same. So those are examples of what rigor is not. And then what rigor looks like, and what we're really going to be discussing today in this strategy group, is students carrying that cognitive load that I talked about and how to really make that shift. And we're going to walk you through what that actually can look like. Challenging students' thinking. So students are really thinking deeply about something in the outcome and explaining it. Cultivating a sophisticated understanding of fundamental ideas, about depth, not difficulty. So again, we're really going to be going into depth about how this can actually look in a lesson in your classroom and involves complex cognitive processes.
And the other thing that we really want to hit on is that rigor involves a productive struggle. And so that goes back to our scaffolding and supports. It's when you have a high rigorous lesson, it's not that every student is so frustrated with it that they can't perform, but really that they are engaged in a productive struggle. And that is a really blurry line to face, and it's going to change with each population of students. So the amount of supports you're going to see is per student, and it's going to change from class to class and from year to year.
So how to design a high rigor lesson. And we're going to actually there's actually a part of this strategy group where you're going to either do it yourself where we can walk you through kind of what it looks like to design one of these. But there's a couple different options. So one, having students involved in the creation process of building a rubric or even a choice board. And then really thinking about the why and having students, the outcome is the students have to explain the why. Thinking about how you were asking students, what you were asking the students to do and why. So really putting a lot of thought as the teacher into why you're asking this and what do you want the outcome to be? What are the expectations? And that's really a lot where the rubric comes in. What are the expectations? What do I want the outcome to be? And then rooting lessons in that why instead of just doing something that, to get through. So you're rooting the lesson in the why, and we're going to be covering this. So you're really pushing students beyond what they're being asked to do and challenging them in that way. So this just sounds like a lot of words. And so we're hoping right now that we can show you examples of kind of what it doesn't look like and then walk you through what it does look like. And that's what we're going to be doing in this next portion. And we're going to talk about rubrics and choice boards. And then this, we have some resources for you, some extra resources. So this has to do with like the depth of knowledge wheel, where you're going to try to get students into that fourth depth of knowledge, where they're really doing some strategic thinking. And we have same for Bloom's taxonomy. The Hess cognitive rigor matrix is where those two meet. So it's the DOK, the depth of knowledge, and Bloom's. And so if you click on any of these, it's going to give you really good ideas on how to design rigorous lessons and make it a lot easier for your planning. So these are just some resources for you to look into as you're designing these. Andrea, do you want to?
Yes, sorry, I've got so many tabs open right now. So here's what we want to do to structure this work time. Amy and Steve and I are all here for your benefit. So we want to make sure that, again, you're getting everything out of the session that you need to, and you can walk away with some lesson materials or at least some like base ideas that you can implement in the very near future. And so this can look a couple of different ways. We can either just leave this open for like brainstorming, Q&A sessions. You have ideas or you like want us to go through one of your upcoming lessons and just go through like, is it like based in rigor? What can you do to support that rigor? We are more than happy to do that. If you would like us to walk through a couple of examples of, how we've taken a couple of different samples of what teachers have given students in attempt to be like super rigorous work, and how to make modifications and tweaks to those so that they, again, are super rooted in rigor. Or you can have time to just, again, explain all of the resources. Here in our Module 5 additional resources, you'll find links to videos where we like go through and explain things. We talk through adding the rigor to that. They have ideas, templates, all that good stuff. So if you just want to spend time checking out some of that stuff and implementing, that's also an option for you. So I want to give us like 1.5 to 2 minutes to just drop in the chat and let us know what you need to be most successful in this session. Okay, so it looks like we have a little bit of different needs here, which is 100% okay. So if you would like to follow along with us, we're going to talk through, Amy's going to cover how to like really utilize the rubrics and make sure that your rubrics are rooted in rigor. Those can be really helpful tools for not only feedback, but to really guide students on what the expectations are for assignments. And then I'll be covering choice boards and how to make sure that your choice boards are rooted in rigor. If you would like to, just peruse on your own, again, we already have these pre-recorded videos saved for you in that Module 5 additional resources link. So feel free to turn off your camera, mute, leave the meet session if you would like to. Remember that we are going to return to the main room this morning at 9:20. So if you are working independently, just make sure that you pop on back to that main room, not this room, but the main room at 9:20. Link is in the slide deck. But if you're following along with us, we are going to go ahead and get started. So, Amy, do you have a preference? Do you want to cover rubrics, or would you like for us to start with choice boards?
No preference. You can just go. I feel like you're on a roll here.
I've had so much coffee this morning.
Perfect. Wake everybody up.
Yes.
So, energy.
Here is our 612 tutorials and guide for module 5. We are over here in strategy 3. If you want to check out some of those additional readings and resources, we got some really cool stuff here, including Becoming a Warm Demander by Zaretta Hammond. So she really goes into, how to keep those relationships with students, but also make sure that you're holding them to high expectations, because that's ultimately what we want. We want to push kids to be their best, but we want to do so in a way that, again, really hones in on those relationship pieces. And then the rest of these are different pieces of framework that you can compare your lessons to, or you can work with while you're designing lessons to make sure that your stuff is all rooted in rigor. And some of these rubrics are really good just because they're a quick way for you to check to see what you're actually asking kids to do with the task. And so that being said, we're going to go ahead and go into our choice board example here. So this is a choice board example that I actually used when I was a teacher in my first couple of years. My school is really big on choice boards, making sure that students had some student voice and agency. So I was going through it, I was making this project, and I was like, yes, I'm giving students all the choice, and it's gonna be super rigorous because they have choice and it's great. However, we're gonna look through and just root ourselves in what I'm asking the students to do, and if that's matching up with the complexity of my standard. So I used to teach social studies. This was for an 8th grade social studies class. And so during our westward expansion movement unit, we really wanted to make sure that our students understood that different populations of people experienced this moving west movement differently. And so I wanted students to compare and contrast the experience of different populations of people during that westward expansion movement. And so that's rooted in my standard H2. So they're analyzing historical time periods and patterns of continuity and change through multiple perspectives within and among cultures and societies. And so what I also really need to ask them to do, a subset of that standard, is to just look at how different, social identity markers impacted the event on that time period. So how they experienced it differently because of their social markers. And so I went through and I said, okay, here are all the groups that we covered during this unit. And so you get to choose 3 of these groups. I want you to highlight, or I want you to bold the populations that you're going to focus on. They need to focus on 3. And then I wanted them to highlight what they were going to do for that. So I thought through and I was like, well, some of my kids are really rock star, stellar writers. I want them to, shine off their skills there. But some of my kiddos, I thought about it, and what the task is asking them to do is not rooted in writing. So it doesn't necessarily have to have a super in-depth analytical writing component. So I was like, well, they can draw a picture or create an artifact. It really hits on some of my artsy students, or they can make a presentation. So if they're super verbal, they like to get up and present, they can do that. They can make posters, or they could put it in a Google slide. I gave them a couple days for this project. And so the first year I did this, you can guess that I gave them a couple days, and they all kind of were squirreling around for the first couple days, and then they crammed it all into the end and did this all in 30 minutes. So that was my first indicator that, this probably wasn't an assignment that I had good timing for, because they didn't need 3 days. most of like, I would say 90% of my students got it done in 30 minutes on the last day. So reflected on that. The second thing that I needed to go ahead and reflect on is what I was actually asking students to do. So when I asked students to write a paragraph, cool, like, yes, write a paragraph, but I don't really give any explanation of what should be in that paragraph. I wasn't really clear on what information they needed to include, or even like how long the paragraph needed to be, if they needed to have sources. All of that was super ambiguous. So when students turned in that assignment, I got a high variety of different paragraphs. So some paragraphs were 3 sentences, and gave me like very base level information. Some of them were like 12 sentences, gave me really good information, cited their sources. It was awesome. But I didn't set my students up for success because I didn't clearly state that that's what they needed. For my drawing a picture or an artifact, I got a lot of stick figures, not gonna lie. Some of them like took it really seriously. They were like sculpting things out of clay. But also I thought about it afterwards, and these pictures and these like clay sculptures that they were giving me didn't really tell me that they knew what I was asking them to know about. It didn't demonstrate their understanding of the concept that we had covered in class. And for the presentation, very similarly to the paragraph, I didn't give them enough information to get high quality results from them. So I took a lot of accountability for the low level results that I got from this project because I didn't give them the tools and the scaffolding that they needed to turn in really high quality pieces of work. If we also look at this, you'll notice that like there isn't a whole lot of complex thinking that they need to do within these options. And again, I don't really set them up for explaining how well they understand the concepts. And on top of that, I'm not actually anywhere in here, I don't tell them to compare these different groups of people. And so none of my students actually compared the groups. They gave me some information about the groups and their experiences, but they didn't take that a step farther and really like do that compare contrast piece. And that's the bulk of the standard, is making sure that they know the difference between these different perspectives and how different demographic groups were experiencing this time period or event. And so what I did is I went back through and I made sure that I'm really thinking through the student product that I want. What do I want students to turn in? In a perfect world, what would an A+ project look like? And so based off of that, I'm going to revise my assignment. So first off, I'm going to make sure that they have the research completed that they needed, because again, when they turned in this initial project, I was like, ooh, some people are just making stuff up right now. Like they're not citing anything, that information isn't even accurate, but nowhere in there did I say that you need to cite your sources. So now I'm going to be very specific, and I'm going to split my assignments into different parts. The chunking of this is also going to help me in the timing aspect. So maybe I have one day where we're just doing like that part 1 narrow focus and research day. And so everybody in class, even though they're going to work on different groups and they're going to pull sources from different information, and some students are going to watch videos and some students are going to read articles, and some students are going to like flip through their notes that we've taken in class, we're all doing our narrow focus and research thing. And that's going to also help me focus when I'm circulating and I'm giving my students feedback, because we're all working on our like research part. And so I gave my students the option. You'll see that it's the same options as they had originally. But now I'm going through and I'm saying, here's all of the questions that you need to ask in that research. Now, I'd also probably have a separate like assignment for this where they actually like script out and write their research notes, whether that's on paper or on Schoology. I prefer Schoology. It's a lot easier for me to like flip through their assignments really quickly. But I'm going to make sure that they have the base of what I need them to do before I'm asking them to like go in and apply that knowledge. So then I give them a bunch of different options when I'm telling them how to highlight the population that they've selected. So they've selected 3 different populations. They did all of their research. And now here are the ways that they're going to show me that they know about those populations. So they can include a scholarly article, and that's going to make sure that they are citing their evidence. They're making sure that they're using like high quality academic language. And I'm putting in a little bit of like fun to it because we read a lot of time kids in our class. So they're going to write an article for a magazine that they regularly read in class. And then again, I'm super specific on what they need to include in this. And you'll notice if you like go through, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but if you go through in each of the options that I give them, they're giving me the same information. And so they're required to do the same level of like thinking through. They're required to give me the same level of understanding in the content, but the mode in which they do it can be different. So for my kiddos who really thrive with like academic scholarly writing, they can choose a scholarly article. But I have a whole lot of kiddos who don't really fit into that bucket and they love creative writing. So for that, I'm going to have them do a journal entry. They're going to have X amount of journal entries in order to do this. And I'm going to make sure that they have correct dates on them. They need to, through their journal entry, again, show me that they understand the concept of that population of people and their experience in moving west. I also allowed them to do a documentary or a podcast. That was going to be like my presentation option. So I'm revamping that so that they actually have a mode of presentation that can be recorded, looked at from different ways. I could even, if we wanted to do some sort of gallery walk, I could have them form that into some QR codes so that students or parents could listen as they're walking around. Or they can do a photo collage, so they can pull a bunch of pictures, but those pictures have to have captions. And the big thing that I explained to them is that through looking at your photo collage, I need to understand that you understand how that population experienced westward expansion. And they don't have to choose actual photos. They can design their own photos. They can draw their own photos. I don't care what they do, but it needs to show me that they understand the concept of westward expansion. They also need to have those captions to explain what these photos are, because I'm not grading them based off of how beautiful their stick figures are. I'm grading them based off of what information those stick figures are telling me. And so that was where my old project ended. But again, I thought back and I said, you know, they really didn't do any comparing and contrasting here. So part 3, they're going to make sure that they analyze all of these questions, they answer all of the questions. And so I said, again, I'm not assessing their writing skills here. I'm not assessing like argumentative writing or informational writing. I'm assessing, do they understand the content? And so for this, they can either write out a script and record it, or they can write me like a scholarly article that's a compare contrast of these different populations of individuals. And so I have these guiding questions for them. They need to answer all of the questions. These questions also, not only do they give the students guidance for writing them, it makes it really easy for me to have like peer feedback sessions. So I can say, switch papers. For this round, you're going to look for the answer to this first question. Can you find the answer to that first question? If you can't find the answer, give them feedback on it. And so that's also making sure they're hitting all of the components of the assignment. I'm giving them different ways to do it, but each of those ways, like none of them are easier than each other necessarily. It's not that I can either write a 5-paragraph essay or draw a stick figure. They're the same cognitive load, but I'm also recognizing that my students have different strengths and skills, and I want to highlight those. So for this project, I ended up having them put all of their final information, their final products, once they had been reviewed and edited, we'd gone through the feedback process. They put their final products into a Google site, and I built a Google site template for them. So you can access that template again from our Module 5 resources. And so they can go through, here's their homepage, here's where they do their 3 populations. Google Sites make it super easy where they can have different layouts, they can change the backgrounds, they can be as creative as they want to. But even if I have my students who they're not into like graphic design or like the prettiness effect of things, it's not going to like, I can have them use this template exactly and it still looks pretty polished, put together. Their experience comparison goes here. And then I also want to make sure that they're writing their sources. For middle school, we really focus on doing that annotated bibliography so that they think through what are credible sources and why they use those sources. But all of that went into a Google site. I then had them submit that Google site. I just had them copy the link when they put the site as live, and I had them submit that in the Schoology assignment. That way I had this list of submitted assignments. I could easily access all of those Google sites and go through them. It also makes it easy for me to post them publicly. So I used to, instead of having students one by one present, we'd have a day of class where they had to go review like 8 different projects and give feedback on those projects to other people. And they would also score on the same rubrics that I used for this assignment. Oh, that was a lot of talking. But are there any questions so far about how I modified that assignment to up the rigor? The big takeaway here is that I really thought through what I was asking my students to do. So even though I spent a lot of time making that original choice board, I really wasn't asking them to do like a high cognitive load like on that task, what they were outputting to me. And so thinking through what in a perfect world would you want your students to turn in, and how are you going to make sure that they end up turning that in? So what supports are you going to give them to make sure that they know exactly what you want? And how are you going to set them up for success on that? If there aren't any questions right now, awesome. Amy, you can take it away. If you think of a question as you're going through these resources, please pop it in the chat, and I'm more than happy to go over those with you.
Okay. Drea, do you have or here, I'll share my screen. Perfect. On it. Okay, so I am going to talk to you about rubrics, and basically I'm not going to do the entire lesson like Drea did, but I'm just going to show you an example of a rubric that might look rigorous at first glance, but isn't, and why, and then go into how that same rubric can be turned into a more rigorous rubric. So at the top here is just the DOK wheel, and we're really trying to get students into this 4th level of extended thinking, or even level 3 strategic thinking, when we are planning a lesson. So just having these kind of words in front of you is going to help you get started in the planning process, but then you have to figure out how to really get kiddos to do these things. So down here, I have an example of what might seem at first glance like a rigorous rubric because it has all of the hit words, or like the important words in there, but why it is not. And so, for example, you might have a rubric, and this is just an example. This isn't something I ever taught, but maybe it's just on World War II. And the way that you have the rubric designed is you want students to tell you or do something, and then you have it going by how many times they have to do that specific task. So, for example, on this rubric, excellent is 5. So for the first one, tell us 5 things you learned about World War II, and then 4 things, 3 things, 2 things. And then for all of them, you're going to see the same pattern. And this is a very common rubric that I have seen in my coaching. So 5, 4, 3, 2. And so the reason that this rubric, it looks rigorous because we're asking students to compare, assess, hypothesize, critique, cite, is it's easy to get away with not doing much. So there's a lot of students out there who aren't really motivated by grades, and maybe even if this was a rubric you created with them, they might not strive to be in this excellent. They might just think, okay, I just have to put 2 things that I learned and I'm done. And so it's really not getting them into those deeper levels of thinking, especially if they're not motivated by their grade at all, then they're not going to be really trying to get in this excellent category. And so therefore you're not going to have the outcome that you are desiring. So I'm kind of taking the same exact idea about World War II and using the rubric a little bit differently. And so I have 2 examples of how this rubric can be made. And so the first example is dividing the rubric first by learning objectives. So what were the main objectives of the unit that I wanted students to really understand? And so I listed these learning objectives here on the left. And then as far as building this part out, it's more, I'm expecting all the students to take a try at it, take a poke at it, but it's about how much they actually know. And so then I can really grade them on this rubric. So for example, need improvement would be they're unable, so the learning objective, what are the broader political and economic causes of World War II? Now, if they can't name any broader political or economic causes, then that would be they need improvement. If they can name some, and I'm going to even get one step deeper here in a second, but if they can name some, that would be satisfactory. If they can name and construct meaning of. And so this is why it's good to either create these rubrics with students or put the rubric in front of the student before they're doing any sort of project and go over the expectations. Because if they're just thinking, oh, I just have to name it, but you really want them to name and construct meaning, that's something they need to know going in. And I'm also going to talk about that here in a second, how you can also accomplish that if you don't have time to go over this rubric with the students. So I'm kind of jumping all around, but that would be good. And then excellent would be name, constructs meaning, and critiques. So they're really taking what they learned one step further. And so this would be adding the critical thinking step to this rubric. Now, if you can't create it with them or you don't have time to go over it with them, or you just want to give them more scaffolding as far as what your expectations are, then right here, I only did it in one little box, but you can actually put in the rubric. So the rubric might get a little bit large and clunky, but if this is something that you're using with students for an entire unit, it could be helpful. Feedback on what to do to make it excellent. So here, there could be an example, or I want you to name something and then construct meaning of like, what does it mean to you? Or maybe you want them to do a journal entry as if they were somebody fighting in the war, writing home and talking about something about the broader political and economic cause. It can be anything you want, but you can include that here so they can see exactly what that looks like to get good, to be, assessed as good or excellent or satisfactory. So that is another component that can be built right into the rubric, and then take away and then the students can be more self-sufficient and work at their own pace. So I just showed you a couple examples of what it could look like when you break down a rubric by learning objective and really hold kids to the higher standard. And then I would highly recommend also kind of incorporating what that looks like into the rubric as well. And you just kind of add that under this part. Another way that you could do it is you could break the unit up just by like key things you wanted them to learn or whatever your essential questions may be. But this one is comparing and contrasting or the impact on families. So this is more just the unit as a whole. And maybe this is at the very end of the unit. You just want to see how much knowledge they have and what they can do with that knowledge. And the same thing goes here. So need improvement would be if it's just inaccurate. So all students are submitting the same thing and being held to the same expectation, but do they have accurate information? Do they have a good understanding of the information? And that's really what you're looking at when you're grading this. Maybe they have a basic knowledge, then good would be good understanding, excellent, they have an excellent understanding, and accurately explain all the important events, facts, and information. And again, if you want this part to happen, that's where you either need to build the rubric together or include it in the rubric itself on the expectations of what it means to get this excellent score. So that was just kind of quick. There also is a video where I go in a little bit more depth. I think it's only like a 5-minute video where I talk about this a little bit more that is linked in the slide deck. But just to give you an idea of what you can do to add to your rubric to make it more meaningful for the students and increase the cognitive load for them. So right now, if you have any questions about rubrics, this would be a great time to ask them. And we also want to give you some time to look at an upcoming lesson and think, do I want to incorporate maybe a choice board of some sort like Drea went over, or a rubric? And what can that look like? So you can have some work time of creating this, asking us questions. We can help you with that if you would like, but this would be a really good time to get some of that work done. And then we can all have our, brains together and see if we can help make one of your upcoming lessons that you already know is coming rigorous. So if you have any questions right now about choice boards or rubrics, I'll give you a minute or two just to kind of digest everything and pop those questions into the chat. And then if not, we can transition into work time.
Amy, are you seeing the question in chat?
I am seeing the question in chat. I was just waiting to see if there's any questions before I started jumping in on their think time. So, and I do not want to pronounce your name incorrectly. Did you jump in?
Yeah, my name is difficult to pronounce, so I go under Kate.
Kate.
I would like to ask more, just typing takes some time. So, yeah.
Oh, well, hi, Kate. Thank you for your question. Kate is asking how to apply it to math. And Kate, are you thinking specifically right now about how to make a choice board maybe for a math lesson or a rubric?
I think about rubrics, and I teach special education population, and I teach high school math to students that's really struggle. They some of them struggle a lot, and for me, it's really difficult how to make a rubric that meets their needs, and at the same time, I also need to think that I need to teach high school standards. So it's very complicated. And I feel like my rubrics, they're not perfect, Every time when I start grading their product, I feel that, I should write it in a different way. And, I just cannot find that balance.
Do you, and I'm not to put you on the spot right now, but do you have a rubric that's already created that you could share? I think you're muted.
So this is one of my rubrics with a floor of 4 points out of 8, like 50%, to make it more fair. But still, I struggle with that highest, like exceeds expectations. My kids never reach it. So I thought even maybe to decrease it, but it will take away that high expectations, because they have to be able to perform that skill, critique and validate. Just so many questions.
And I think that, just glancing at this for a second, Andrea, maybe you want to jump in, but I'm thinking, because I see that the 8 is the only one where they're asking to do anything that's like explaining their knowledge of math and not just creating an outcome or following a formula, but really understanding math. And I think, like what Jay was saying in her example about adding in that scaffolding, because if it's just in the rubric like this, but students have never been taught how to actually do that or see what it looks like, or they're not practicing it over and over, then it seems to me that they're not going to be reaching that standard or that what you would like for them to do. So building in the scaffolding to do that. So it's something that you're doing together as a group on what does it look like when we evaluate or interpret, or, you know, it has evaluate, interpret, and critique, but maybe it could just be one of those per rubric. What does it look like to interpret this, and giving these examples so they understand what that looks like, and they can see you thinking through what it looks like with an example, and then understanding that that's the expectation for the next time. And so I think it would be about building and scaffolding. Do you have anything to add to that, Drea?
Yeah, so I'd agree with that. I think that rubric wise, the only thing that I might change is to take out that like 8 category and almost make it its own like criteria of like the depth that they can explain their thinking in that. Because I think that Amy hit it right on the head, is like when they get that above grade level expectation for this, you're asking them to not only do the problem, but explain how they did the problem. And I think that like that in itself, like I know from like the way that math has been shifting over the years, like it's really about them being able to explain how they got there. And so you might want to make that its own category, whereas the rest of your criteria are based off of like, can they correctly answer the question? So you have 2 things going here. You have like, one, can they do the question, and like what part of the question are they getting stuck on? And then you also have like, can they explain how they did the question? So like, for example, I can memorize a formula, plug numbers in. I can't explain what those numbers mean, but like I can do that. And so that would be 2 different levels of a rubric.
So like adding additional criteria just for evaluation and interpretation of their own understanding, you mean?
Yep. So I would almost take that like 8, make it its own criteria, and then like the 8, which would be either fully meeting or exceeding expectations, that can be like they can evaluate, interpret, and can critique the validity of other approaches. Whereas like a 7 could be they can evaluate and interpret like their response to it. That 8 would be like, can they look at other responses and see like, oh, that's another way to get there, but my way is easier or harder or better because of X, Y, and Z. The 7 would then be, I can explain the whole thought process. A 6 would be, you know, I can kind of explain it, but I really can't like go into depth with it. And then a 5 would be like, I can tell you how I got the numbers. 4 would be, I don't provide any explanation at all. But I think that the issue that you're having, I definitely would not take out that like top level, because that's where the grade level standard is. And so like the whole push, and I know that especially in math, like there's so many building blocks that they need that if they really don't have those foundational pieces, it's very hard for them to move on to like the more complex formulas. And so I think that your issue here isn't necessarily a rubric problem. It's how can like we provide those appropriate scaffolds and supports to make sure that students have what they need to be able to produce grade level work. And so for this, I need a little bit more explanation. This might be like a one-on-one conversation that you can have with your coach, so like they can really work with you on like what you're asking kids to do, and then looking at like the work that they're submitting in like practice and stuff. Where are you seeing like where they're getting stuck, and then how can you help them get unstuck? So like this student here, or in this assignment that you gave them, are you explicitly telling them that they have to like go through and evaluate their like how they solved the problem? So that could be a reason that like they're not getting that 8 consistently. In my experience, students will not, they typically will not go above and beyond just to go above and beyond, or do additional steps that aren't included in the instructions. And so that might be part of the like instructions that you're building in, of like, cool, part A, solve the problem. Part B, explain how you solved the problem. And then looking at that, this now is turning into like a data-driven instruction conversation, which has where all of my conversations tend to go because like I'm a huge data nut. But if you can look at how, like where your students are, facing a lot of those misconceptions and either doing like reteach of those concepts, giving them additional like videos or supports, or like really practicing with them on like, okay, they're getting stuck on like the multiplication piece because they're not multiplying correctly. So maybe we need to like have small group where we just focus on like, okay, so like multiplying these like advanced formulas or fractions or whatever they're doing. This is where like we're going to practice that step because that's where you're getting all your misconceptions. And if you do that part wrong, the other parts are going to be wrong too. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does make a lot of sense. But my question, how they can show their understanding?
So you can do this in a couple ways. You can have them write it out.
No, it doesn't work.
Cool.
Usually those students literally cannot write. Even signing their papers becomes a problem for readers,
Okay. And yep, I get that too. I used to have a lot of kiddos who really struggled with writing. And so like they knew what they wanted to say, but then putting it into writing took 10 and a half years to get it to a place where like it made sense and like all of the logistics were there. So you're not assessing them on writing right now. And so I would think that it would be appropriate for you to offer them like an audio solution, or like if they're doing it on their Chromebooks, you could have them like use Screencastify to just record their thought process of like, this is how I solved this problem. If they're doing it on pencil paper, you could have them like, Schoology has an audio tool built in. And so you could have, they submit the assignment, which would be like them uploading something, but then they also like use that audio recording tool to explain that thought process. The other thing I've done is I've used Flipgrid before. And I used to make like interactive study guides. And so each student would get like a question on the study guide. They'd respond to it in the Flipgrid, like really explain out the process. And then all of the questions were answered by different students in the class. So you could either have an approach like that. You could have them all solving like the same question and then have them like compare how there's like their solutions to different people. That would really get into the critique the validity of others' approaches. So you could have them like record on this platform and then say like, oh, Isaiah solved it in this way, but Dante solved it in this way. And they got the same answer. Which one is a better way to solve this? And that really hits in on that like explanation piece. Within Flipgrid, they can either type comments or they can video record their comments. And so that takes out the like additional layer of complexity when it comes to, you have a lot of students who are not super strong writers. And we really want to focus on like the math part of it rather than spending a lot of time on the writing component. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. But my next question in this case, where can I get resources or maybe classes so I can learn those Flipgrid and deeply understand Schoology, just because it's really, I don't see how I can learn it on my own.
What school are you at, Kate?
Thomas Jefferson High.
Okay, that coach is
Molly McGrath.
Awesome. I would reach out to Molly.
Okay.
And like that's like 90% of Molly's job right there is to like sit down with you and work through it with you on like how to look at Schoology and use the features in Schoology appropriately, how to use Flipgrid with your class, how to get all that set up. And then like she can sit down with you and look at an actual lesson and say like, okay, like she'll be that thought partner with you of here's where students are like, tripping up, getting into some like roadblocks. What can we give them to like fix their tire on that roadblock? So she's going to be like your point person for that one-on-one connection to really teach you that. When you have platforms like Schoology does so many amazing, incredible things, but that also makes it super overwhelming to learn. So Molly will be able to sit with you and like give you the pieces that you need at that moment without you being like, again, overwhelmed with the 8-page Schoology all in one. I can also share those with you though. We have a all-in-one for Flipgrid and for Schoology. And like, if Molly's not available, or like it's a Saturday morning and you really need like a quick tutorial on this, those all-in-ones are going to be where you can get all of those from. So I'm going to find those and pop them in the chat. Amy, anything to add?
I don't have anything to add, but I just want to reiterate, I highly recommend reaching out to Molly. She's really great to work with and she can help you with everything. I just popped her email address in the chat as well. And she's expecting you to reach out. Like Drea said, it's 90% of her job. And I think she could really help you feel more comfortable with some of those platforms that Drea was just mentioning. And even with just the building out the rubric and how to get your students to think through things and show you that they understand if it's not in writing, but in a different way.
Sure, I will. I actually stay connected to her because we both work on how to provide the best access for the student who is blind. So, yeah.
Perfect. And then Drea, it looks like she popped in the all-in-one for Schoology in there. So you can bookmark that. And then you pop in some more in there, Drea. So for anybody who's still in this call, these are great resources for all of the ed tech programs that we support that you can go through on your own and watch videos we've created and how-to tutorials, bookmark them, and just have them at your disposal.
It's overall really interesting, and just the lack of time. I just don't know where to find time to do all that stuff.
I totally understand that. Like, life of anybody in education is like, we do not have enough time to do like half the things that we like feel like we need to be doing. And so Molly can also help with, I know that like when I work with teachers, a lot of the times if there's like a resource that needs to be created, or like an instructional thing that you just don't have the time in the day to make, like Molly can help support with that. And then the other thing that I like really want to highlight, I know we're talking a lot about like, no, you don't have to make them right. And there is a like large push to have students practice writing, but we want to make sure that students are getting a lot of practice in practicing things correctly. And so like, yes, there's definitely times and opportunities where we need them to practice writing because, you know, they might not get those accommodations on state exams like SAT, ACT, stuff like that. But we don't want them to like sit there and practice things incorrectly over and over and over and over again. And so if the thing that you're looking at and you're giving feedback on is math, then the mode of how they get that math explanation to you can be like whatever their strongest skill set is. So for some kids that could be writing, for some kids that could be like verbal processing, and using those tools to make sure that that's there. The other thing Molly can do is she can like, there are some teachers that I worked with who are like, this sounds super cool, but like, I just, that seems like it's taken on a lot. I don't know like how that would work. I would want to see it first. She can also help like co-teach things with you. Again, as her schedule allows. I feel bad that I'm like booking up her calendar for you, but if you reach out to her, she should be able to like support you in getting this done in a reasonable way, so that it's not like you shouldn't be staying up till all hours of the night trying to, you know, make sure that your rubrics are there. So
yeah, I guess it's a complete rethinking of all the strategies, just because math is not easy to work on the like laptop, Chromebook, you know, with those formulas. So it takes I would say a long time to teach students to do it on the Chromebook. Math is really easier on with paper and pencil. So right now I start to think how to incorporate those electronic resources, internet resources. I mean, beyond the videos, because videos are easy. You just can click and watch. But collaboration and even explanation of your own solution becomes a challenge. Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering, like, because you could also incorporate in, like, for the learning process, like you said, videos. Videos are a great tool.
Yeah.
But like taking that a step further and like making them ed puzzles. So like, you have a video explaining a math concept, and then you can use ed puzzle to pause the video and ask them to like do a sample question, and like then they respond to the sample question, they pop in their answer. If their answer is correct, you can give them feedback. If it's incorrect, you can give them feedback. But it's that additional layer of practice. Also, your students should have the Lenovo 300s, which are the touch screens. And so just off the top of my head, I know that like in Screencastify and in Flipgrid, they can use like a whiteboard feature. So they can use their like finger or a stylus to write out the actual math equations without having to, because those math keyboards are no joke. I've tried using them before. I'm not a super mathy person and I'm super frustrated by them. So like, yes, it's way easier for me to like draw out the division symbol than to try to find it on the math keyboard. So that could be something that's really helpful for them, to be able to use those drawing tools to really like sketch that out and show their work. Pear Deck is another thing that you could use, where there's drawing tools included. Again, they can use their trackpad.
Which one is that?
Pear Deck.
Oh,
So-
Pear Deck. Okay, yeah, I'm professional Pear Deck.
Perfect. So yeah, you could insert some of those drawing slides, and again, they can use their finger, they can use a stylus, they can use the trackpad to really draw out those equations. And Pear Deck gives you a super easy way to like highlight those different answers and model through that thought process of, hey, the way you did this is really different, but they both came up with the same conclusion.
Thank you. I will share the idea with additional criteria for explanation. So it's not just, exceeds expectation, but it also build in every level of performance, because even if you know just how to start the task, you already can comment on it, and it should count. That's a great idea. I never thought about it before. I hope I explained it well.
Yes, awesome. I'm so glad that like we could be helpful.
Yeah. You make people think.
So we've got about 6 minutes left before we pop back over to the main room. If there are any other people who want to like brainstorm, bounce ideas, please just go ahead and like unmute, brainstorm away. Amy and I are here along with Steve. Otherwise, start thinking about like what you can put in as that reflection prompt. Those reflection prompts are always like, what are you working on? How are you going to implement this in your classroom? And so just start thinking through that so that when you return to the main room, it is ready to go and give great inspiration to other people.
So it's time to go to the main room? Sorry, I'm a little bit confused.
No, you're so fine. If you want to pop over, you totally can. The room is open and ready. We're all going to like regroup, and the expectation is everybody is in the main room by 9:20. So that's about 5 minutes away.
And it's going to be another block?
Nope. We're just going to wrap up real fast. So it should be like 5-10 minutes of reflection, some announcements, and then you are off on your way to your next session.
So while I have like 5 more minutes to ask. So what I struggle teaching mathematics to students that struggle, that don't have those learning routines, and they even don't realize what they know, what they don't. And we need to move pretty fast. I mean, I cannot stand the same topic for longer than I have to move on. And I feel like students stay with fragments, and I don't know how to overcome this challenge, because when you teach social studies and in English literacy, it's a little bit different. and also science, they're somehow in between mathematics and I would say maybe social studies, because you kind of combine both. But math is very, very structured, and I just don't know. It's very challenging for me.
No, absolutely. And you're 100% right in saying that like the strategies that you use in math can look really different than what we use in like literacy and social studies. I know in social studies our standards can like spiral on each other, and so if they don't really get it in unit 1, we're going to do it again in unit 2. So don't you panic. Whereas in math, like if you don't get it in unit 1, we really don't hit it again until like the midterm or the final exam. So what I would do is, again, like use whatever data you have from exit tickets, from pre-assessments, while they're in the learning process, so that you can figure out like where those gaps are. And then like I'm a huge fan of using like small group instruction, and using that like differentiated model of like, I've got some kids who are working on this, some kids who are working on this, some kids who are working on this, and they're all building blocks and scaffolds so that they can achieve that grade level work. Amy, you want to add some stuff?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I taught middle school math for a while. And what I found is if students don't have the basic like number sense, the basic concepts in math, they can't go on. And so many students don't just have basic number sense. And then they're just going to struggle for the rest of their life in math because they don't have the foundations of how to think strategically, like with a math brain. They just don't have it. And so they're always going to be playing catch up, and there's always going to be huge gaps when you're trying to learn something new, trying to teach them something new, and they're still struggling with basic number sense, which is what I found was the biggest issue with most students, is just not understanding numbers, how they work together, how they go together, how you break them apart. So what I had to do was 2 things worked successfully. One was, with math, there's so many different ways to explain it. And I noticed that I have one way of thinking and one way of explaining it. And half of my students would just get it. But the other half, I would keep explaining it the same way, the way I know how, and they just wouldn't understand. But if I pulled a different adult, or sometimes even just a different student who was higher level, to explain it to them in their own, in a different way, then there would be light bulbs going off. And I was like, I would never even have thought of to say it that way. So I had some of my advanced students actually running groups on like, can you help these students with this concept? And it was, simple, the foundational things in math, but that's what they needed. But I still was doing grade level stuff, whole group. And then when it was work time, that's when we would break up into groups. And we did have rotations. So there would be like an advanced student running a group. I had a para who ran a group. I was running a group. And then there was a group where they were doing independent work, and they were rotating. But all the groups who needed the foundations, when they were with me and the para and the advanced student, they were just working on foundations, even though the lesson for the day was whatever was the grade level lesson, because it was like scaffolding to get them there. Because I knew if they never understood the basics, then every day was just going to be wasted for them. So that's one thing that helped, and really thinking about how other people explain things differently, and it will resonate with different people just based on the word choice or the way their brain works or the way they think through things out loud. I don't know. So maybe that could be helpful.
Just want to remind everybody that it is now 9:20, so we should go ahead and head back. And I'd say, Kate, just keep asking these really good questions, especially in following up with Molly. I think she's going to be really good for you to consult with. Make sure you stop the recording, Drea.